First met Townes in 1967 at the Second Fret in Philadelphia. It was a folk club. I was 16 years old and went down to see Woody's Truck Stop, which was a band that originally Todd Rundgren had been in, but it was a wonderful Philadelphia country rock band before there was country rock. Anyway, and Townes was opening, and I was one of them kids who hung out in the back rooms and weaseled my way wherever I could. Met Townes. He was a fresh-faced, he was not strung out by then. And then over the years, I played guitar for him at the Jerry Jeff birthday party one time, and I did cut If I Needed You on a tribute record to him. But yes, we were friends. The problem was, as much an abuser as I was one that always got up the next day, and as opposed to Blaze and Townes, I just couldn't get into the heroin and heavy alcoholism. I'd have a drink and I'd do some blow maybe, but I was always a pothead and kind of got in the way of your pot high. But I was glad because they were really on self-destructive paths that obviously that's what happened.
What did the people in the community at that moment think of Townes and his talents or whatever? Was it recognized?
Oh yeah, he was revered. Blaze, unfortunately, no, because he was so so cantankerous, obviously, and at times, I guess. But the songs were just brilliant, But Townes was accepted because he was not violent and he was not big, and he was not ornery. Oh, Blaze just looked at him. He was going, "Hey, what did I do?" Townes was sweet. Even he just wanted, Guy Clark was a good friend. Guy. See, a lot of things. What a lot of people don't realize about that whole thing was, writing songs. If you're Harlan Howard, who was a great friend of mine, Harlan would get up, go to work at 9 o'clock and write from 9 till 1 or 2, and then go out drinking and get ideas. Because, I remember his wife said, "Well, why don't you go hang out with the publishers and everything?" He says, "Listen, I need a down and out waitress at the bar is going to tell me a better story than a fucking corporate lawyer," And that was one thing. But Townes, Guy, Blaze, especially Townes and Guy, and I knew this from personal, they needed stimulants, and to sit there and write songs, the inspiration is so fickle that Go Fast Drugs and all this thing really help. Look at Roger Miller. I mean, who was the original Pillhead, Johnny Cash, Roger Miller, etc. Those kind of things, thoughts come fast and furious, And I still remember, a guy saying one time, "I got to go get something, man. I need to write songs. I need to write songs. I need to go get something." And that's a dedication to the craft, But it's a dead end street at some point,
It's a hard way to live.
Yeah. And I tried, and then by the time I was 31, and I'd seen so many of my friends, go down that path, I said, "All right, I'm done." I had a kid and a life and a band, and I said, it was still ridiculous. It's still back then, pot was just as bad. You had to worry about getting busted, but health-wise, it was no problem. The coke was bad, the speed was bad. So,
There's a picture of Guy and Susanna on a porch with Townes, and Townes is playing a fiddle.
Famous picture.
That was taken at Guy's house just right over here, and they tore it down. One of the many things torn down in Nashville about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think of their East Nashville roots.
I've been writing a song I'll never finish it called "This Ain't the Same Old Town. They're tearing all the buildings down and selling them by the pound. This ain't the same old town." I might just leave it at that because it's too sad. The same thing with Austin. The other day was funny. Stevie Vaughan was a friend of mine, and one of the houses that he lived in, that I know he lived in because I had visited him in it at one point to kick his ass because he was doing speed, and I said, "Dude, come on." "Oh, okay," so they got on coke. But anyway, they were selling the house to be moved. And my girlfriend actually has a whiskey company, and we were hoping that her boss now would buy it to move it to the distillery. It's like, this is Stevie Ray Vaughan's house, man. Although he had been, he just rented houses. He didn't have the money. But yeah, it's that whole thing is so much of my recording studio that I sold the building and I built a new studio. But the building that was there for 27 years, I had Haggard had been there, Garth had been there, Willie had been there, And I tried, it was worth so much money, just the property, that I sold it because the pandemic was a good thing because it helped me through the pandemic. But, they would have tore it down to build a condo. Luckily, I sold it to somebody who just let somebody put another studio, not a good one, but it's okay. It's a recording studio, and all these people had been there, And I said, there should be a fucking plaque on this wall, and nobody cares, Yeah, I made our first record we recorded at Mercury Studios, which is, I think now sound something.
I was in there like 3 months ago.
Yeah. It's across from CBS over on that side street.
Ronnie Millsap's old place.
Correct. Yeah. That was my first, it was Mercury Studios. Tom Sparkman was the engineer. He was the Opry engineer live. Back in the Opry, there weren't no amps. He plugged into the wall, and the guy mixed you on the thing. But anyway, yeah, it was 8-track. Our first record was 8-track, and analog. And also, we were just in. Nashville was so funky. I mean, Music Row, 16th and 17th. There were all these buildings with mom and pop businesses. My favorite was Troy Hess. He was this kid, and his dad, Benny Hess, he had put out the Ballad of George Wallace and whatnot. And he had a house with because it was, in 1971, when I hit Nashville, so I actually came in 70, went to the Opry, but knocking on doors in 71, the biggest country sales were 25,000 albums. Johnny Cash was the first to sell 500,000 records, and that was because of TV, not because of country radio. And by 73 or 4, they had dropped him from CBS, So it was so different, and it was all the session players. You know what session scale was here in 1971? 3-hour session, $30. And they would do 3 a day. They were making $90 a day, and they were rich, as far as I was concerned. Tommy also was producing our first record, and Tommy had been, with Buddy Holly, he played Buddy, but he also worked with Bob Wills and Billy Gray, Western Swings. Anyway, and I said, where are you going now? He said, I got a session. He said, who's it for? He said, I don't know, text nobody. They call them text nobody sessions. And the guys would come in 3 hours, they'd cut 2 sides, and then for, I think it was $1,200 for 2 sides, and then they'd get a stack of 45s, And that was where a lot of the guys made a living, And my first session I went to was Mel Tillis in Columbia RCA B, which is now the tourist room, And he was doing a duet with Sherry Bryce called "Living and Learning," and he was drunk, and we had somehow gotten somebody to let us in. You just yeah, 3 of us, and we're long-haired guys, and Mel's drunk. And he finishes the thing, 2 sides, and he throws them on the floor. And at the time, the Beatles had just finished the White Album, and it took them 6 months to do. And he goes, fucking Beatles, 6 months. 6 hours. And it was, yes, sir, Mr. Tillis. We became good friends over the years, Mel and I. It was so interesting to see the growth of country music, and then Farron Young, my hero, one of the greatest, cut Willie's Hello Walls, etc. And he was the one who at the time And he goes, John Lennon and Yoko Ono had just done the naked photo thing, and he goes, and there was that naked nip on the goddamn thing, and we're going, okay, well, that's Nashville, yeah. I just adored it because it was so funky. I mean, it was, there was 65 labels, I can't even remember. Everybody had what do you mean label, In the charts, there was 1 through 65 on the country charts, It wasn't top 40, it was 65 records. And it was you would go to all these AM radio stations, and promote your little record, Jukebox operators, that was big. You went to the jukebox operators because they bought 45 to put on the jukeboxes. 77, I remember we hired a guy out of college. He later became a partner of mine. He would go before the band. He'd go to the record store and the radio stations. Oh, they're coming to town, and that's how you did it, if you were lucky. Of course, we were making $150 a week. Each band member had a bus that broke down every day. I drove, or maybe we get somebody to drive, But it's why I say it's really. But we were able to have a band, 5 to 7 piece, depending on the year, and later 10 to 12 pieces, because nobody cared, You got to play, you're on a bus, a funky ass bus, but they didn't have the big, these were double clutching. You had to, like with Tillis, everybody in the band had to drive. I mean, that was part of the deal. And
there weren't a lot of major interstates between things sometimes too.
The interstates stopped at the edge of town. And when the first cell phones came in, we got one, of course. You couldn't hold them. They were a bag phone, or else they're in the wall of the bus. And they would work on the east side of town to the west side of town, then they'd fade out to the next town. And the interstate's the same thing. None of them had loops. You go straight through town, and then they started building these loops. I was driving. Occasionally we'd have a driver, but we would always, and that's when that's the only time I took pills, was when I had to drive, because you had to, that's safety. That's what I'm saying. What do you mean? You want me to drive without these?
Waylon's book, he called them L.A. turnarounds.
The L.A. turnarounds were, I can't remember exactly, but they had Black Mollies, L.A. turns around. Dex Mills were Christmas trees because they were little capsules with green and white. And of course, Bennies, which were white pills. We used to say, the thing was, you'd throw them against the windshield and catch them in. And of course, me being me, I tried to explain, my poor kids. And I would roll joints while driving. You put it on a big wheel. And back then, these were seated joints. I mean, because it wasn't sense of me. I can't believe we didn't die. But we were young and stupid and determined, really, to change the way it was, and it worked.
I think that's one thing that some of the people you talked about, there's an ambition that it takes just to survive all of that, that maybe a person like Townes might not be so ambitious for career-wise or whatever.
Exactly what it is that they were living for the song, I was a performer. I've always wanted to be on stage from the time I could remember. And it was more important for me to be able to get on stage. That was my goal, to play every night. And we did it, And, along the way, I was very, I built studios and produced other folks and did management because I had to, my friends always called me Biz Benson because you take care of business. I said, yeah, man, because that's what I want. I want to be able to do this. I want the best musicians in my band, and that means you got to pay them. And how do we pay them? And that was the thing. I don't love doing business, but I like the results of it. And believe me, you know, the career is like this, if you're lucky. And when we hit the down times, I just would be persistent. I'm going to find my way out of this mess somehow. And Willie was the same way. I mean, I still remember before, I have to put the dates on this because I'm not sure what. Maybe it's late 90s, and Willie's not doing well in terms of, you know, no more hits. He ain't getting the hits. They're not playing him anymore. And what does he do? Probably it's 2000s, I think. You know, hops on fucking Toby Keith's Gravy Train. Does one of the worst songs Willie Nelson's ever done, Beer for My Horses, and gets back on the charts. And then gets back on the charts, and then does, you know, and starts realizing, you got to be with young people or you're nobody anymore. Does stuff with Leanne Womack, great stuff, you know, and all of a sudden he crosses that line, and he's a legend, you know. And he starts making better money, but, you know, we were, you know, I did a lot of stuff with Will. Okay, like a lady comes to me and says, I want Willie to play my 80th birthday, and I can't get his agent, nobody will. And I said, how much money you got? He said, I said, I used to see him at the Broken Spoke back in the 60s. I said, I'll tell you what, give me $100,000 and we'll play the Broken Spoke, I promise. So I go to Willie, I said, hey, you off on next Tuesday? Or, you know, this lady wants to, I said, I'll give you $75,000 and we'll back you up because we're one of the only bands that he would let, you know, back up without the family band. And I said, sure, man. So I give him $100,000 in cash. The lady gave me $25 for a sleep at the wheel and production, and I did that a number of times with Will. Because a lot of people don't realize, I don't care how much money you're making, you got manager, agent, publicist, fuel, bus driver saying, you ain't making a lot after everything, and cash is king. And as long as he had cash, he was fine. And when the IRS thing hit, it was tough because they took everything. I still remember one time B. Spears, who lived here, was his bass player, arranged, you know, some honky-tonk out on Nolensville Road or somewhere, I don't know, said, okay, Willie will come in and play with the house band here. He wants $2,500. Just start calling everybody you know. He'll be here at 10. And that's how he made it through the IRS sometimes, you know. Here's $2,500 cash. Now you got cash in your pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
A place out on Nolensville Road?
Well, I'm making up Nolensville,
Okay.
but it was something like that. It was out, or maybe it was, you know, it was somewhere out at some honky-tonk, you know.
Can you imagine the guy that just happened to come in after work, have a beer, and
It's
there's Willie Nelson playing?
for 45-minute set, yep. Yeah, and that's, like I say, because I remember the IRS thing was tough, and so I'm out there with him, and I said, how you doing, pal? He said, I'm all right. He said, a little embarrassed for my family because it spread all over the news. He said, but hey, I can walk into any honky-tonk in America and walk out with thousands of dollars. What the fuck? And that's Willie, and that's the way I am, because it's the only way you can be. You know, you got to love what you're doing, and we do. I love getting up and playing. That's all I know. I don't love sometimes traveling, although sometimes I do. Looking out the window of the buses, I've been on that damn thing 54 years, and I still love watching America go by, because it's just fascinating. You know, if you got an imagination, there it is. It's a movie. I'm so fortunate that I was able to figure it out. You know, how do I keep doing this?